There is a particular kind of silence that a child learns very early. It is not the silence of sleep or contentment. It is not the silence of a child absorbed in play or a book or her own imagination. It is a different silence entirely. The silence of calculation, of a small person measuring exactly how much space she is permitted to occupy before the room shifts in temperature around her. I recognized it the moment I saw it settle over my niece Lily at a Sunday dinner in late October. I recognized it because I had worn it myself every day for the first 17 years of my life. When I saw it on her, on a 7-year-old sitting with her hands folded in her lap, waiting to be told when to reach for her fork, something in me went very still. My name is Rosalind Fairhaven. I am 33 years old. The morning I walked out of the Henley County Family Court building with a stamped petition in a manila folder and a $47 filing receipt on the passenger seat of my Honda Civic, my father had no idea what I had done. He would find out on a Tuesday. I know that sounds like an ordinary detail. It is not. I grew up in a 3-bedroom house on Carver Mill Road in a suburb called Dunellen, Ohio, the kind of neighborhood where everyone recognized everyone else's cars in the driveway and no one discussed openly what happened behind anyone's doors. My father, Gerald Fairhaven, worked as a shift supervisor at a regional distribution warehouse for 22 years. He was not a man who raised his voice often. He didn't need to. Gerald had a different method, one that was quieter and, I think, more effective than shouting ever could have been. It was the slow, incremental withdrawal of approval, so gradual, so carefully calibrated, that you didn't notice it happening until you were already outside the warmth of it and couldn't remember the last time you'd been allowed in. My mother, Patricia, died of a stroke when I was 12 years old. She had been the counterweight in our household, not perfectly, not always, but she had been a softening presence between my father's ledger-keeping and the daily lives of his children. After she died, my father ran the house the way he ran his warehouse floor, through hierarchy, efficiency, and the clear assignment of roles that were never explicitly stated, but were understood by everyone. My brother Derek was 3 years older than me. In the months after our mother's funeral, he stepped into a kind of deputy position that no one officially assigned him, but that everyone in the house recognized. Derek got the car on weekends, without asking. Derek's college fund conversation happened at the kitchen table over dinner when he was 16. Mine happened in a brief hallway exchange when I was 17 and already researching scholarships on my own. Derek got the benefit of the doubt, reflexively, almost every time something was disputed. I got the expectation that I understood the arrangement without requiring it to be explained to me. I want to be fair to my father because fairness matters to me professionally and personally, and because he is not a simple man. I have spent years trying to understand him accurately rather than just reacting to him. I think he genuinely believed he was maintaining order. I think the loss of my mother broke something structural in him, something that had held the softer, more flexible parts of him together, and what remained was a man who had fused control with love so completely that he could no longer tell the difference between them. He was not the kind of father who did not love his children. He was the kind who could not separate love from management. Everything was accounted for. Approval was a finite resource distributed according to a system only he fully understood. And some accounts were simply more solvent than others, for reasons that were never explained and therefore could never be appealed. I left Dunellen at 18 years old on a partial scholarship to study social work at Harwick State University. I did not move back. I completed my degree in 3.5 years, took a position with Henley County Child and Family Services, and eventually became a licensed family services coordinator, the kind of work that pays $51,000 a year and requires you to walk into rooms that are difficult in specific, identifiable ways, sit across from families in various states of fracture, and see clearly what the people in those rooms are choosing, consciously or not to see. I was good at it. My supervisor, Deborah Osei, told me in my 3rd year that I had a gift for reading the distance between what a family said and what a family meant. I did not tell her where I had developed that skill or how early I had started practicing it. Derek married a woman named Corinne when he was 26. Corinne was warm and a little guarded in the way of someone who has learned to be careful in unfamiliar territory. She and I got along well in the quiet, unhurried way of two people who understand each other without needing to map it all out. They had one daughter together, Lily, born when Derek was 28. Corinne died in a car accident on Route 9 when Lily was 4 years old. It was January, black ice, a curve that wasn't marked well enough for the conditions. Derek never fully recovered from it, and never fully recovered looks different on different people. On Derek, it looked like long absences, stretches of 4 or 5 days where he stayed at a friend's house or drove somewhere unspecified and returned quieter and thinner than he'd left. He functioned. He kept his job at an auto parts distributor in Newfield. He came home. He just wasn't reliably present in the ways that a 7-year-old needed a parent to be present. My father stepped in to manage Lily's daily life. School drop-offs, meals, bedtime routines, medical appointments, and he told Derek, told me, told anyone who asked that the situation was under control and being handled responsibly. For longer than I should have, I believed him. I noticed the change in Lily at Sunday dinner in late October, 18 months before I filed the petition. I had driven the 41 minutes from my apartment in Westonville to Carver Mill Road for the regular monthly dinner my father insisted on. The kind of insistence that wore the clothes of family tradition while functioning as something closer to a head count. I brought a jar of orange blossom honey from the Westonville Farmers Market because Lily had loved honey on her biscuits since she was 5. Derek had told me she used to ask on Saturday mornings if it was almost Sunday yet. That evening she did not reach for the honey. She sat in the chair beside my father's at the head of the table with her hands folded in her lap, and she waited. She did not ask for anything. She did not fidget or chatter the way she had at every dinner I could remember before that one. She checked my father's face before she picked up her fork. It was a small motion, a glance, a check, a calibration, and it lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It is possible no one else noticed it, but I noticed it, and it pulled at something in my chest that I could not immediately name. I told myself I was probably carrying my work home in my head. I told myself that children went through quiet phases, that grief had long cycles, that Lily had lost her mother at 4 years old, and the effects of that kind of loss were not linear or predictable. I told myself these things with genuine conviction for the next 6 months, right up until the point when I stopped being able to convince myself that what I was seeing was a quiet phase. I started keeping notes. Not formally, not in any official capacity. I was not Lily's caseworker. I had no professional standing to open a file, just personally, in a small green composition notebook I kept at the bottom of my work bag. I wrote down dates and observations. The 2 shirts she cycled through at Sunday dinners, both visibly too small across the shoulders. The way she excused herself quietly if a conversation escalated in volume, even mildly. The flinch, small, fast, more of a bracing than a recoil, when my father's voice shifted register. The fact that in 8 consecutive Sunday dinners I counted, she did not once ask for a second helping of anything. In February, I requested her school attendance records through the county's Family Access portal, listing myself as a concerned family member. What came back showed 14 absences in the fall semester alone, 9 of them unexcused. I wrote the number down in the green notebook and sat with it for a long time. In March, I called her 2nd grade teacher, Miss Patricia Voss, and asked, in the careful language I had learned to use professionally, whether she had any concerns about Lily's engagement in the classroom. Ms. Voss paused for a moment before she answered. Then she said that Lily was a very careful, very quiet child who had expressed some worry about making mistakes. She said it gently, the way teachers learn to say difficult things to adults who might not want to hear them. I thanked her and wrote down her exact words when I got off the phone. I pulled the last well-child visit summary from the county health portal in April. It was 18 months out of date, the most recent on record. It noted that Lily was underweight by 6 pounds for her age and height, and that a follow-up visit had been recommended. There was no record of a follow-up visit. I drove to Carver Mill Road on the first Sunday in April and waited until after dinner to speak to my father alone. I found him in the kitchen rinsing dishes. I stood in the doorway and told him, as carefully and plainly as I knew how, that I had some concerns about Lily. I said I had noticed some things over several months, and I wondered whether she might benefit from talking to someone, a counselor, a therapist, someone she could speak to outside the house. He set the dish in the drying rack. He turned around. He looked at me with the expression I had known my whole life, the one that was not quite cold and not quite dismissive, but was both of those things compressed into a studied neutrality. Then he said, "She's fine, Rosalind. She is adjusting. You spend all week walking into troubled households, and you come here on Sundays and you project it onto your own family. She is a child who lost her mother. She is quiet. That is not a crisis. That is grief." I said I did not think I was projecting. He said, "You always overreact. You always have. Even as a child, you made everything larger than it needed to be." I did not argue. I knew arguing would accomplish nothing, and I had known for a long time that my father's certainty was a closed system. New information did not enter it and revise what was inside. It simply bounced off the surface. I went back to the dining room and sat across from Lily, who was drawing a horse in the margin of her paper placemat with a ballpoint pen she had found somewhere. The horse was careful and anatomically specific, legs correctly proportioned, a serious expression, ears angled with attention. I told her it was beautiful. She looked up at me for 2 full seconds, said "thank you" in a voice that was just barely louder than the room, and looked back down at the drawing. I drove home on I-77 that night with the Earl Grey tea tin I had accidentally left in my coat pocket on the passenger seat, and a feeling in my chest I could not fully articulate. I sat in my apartment parking lot for 11 minutes before going inside. I did not eat anything. I made tea. I did not drink it, and I opened the green notebook to a fresh page, wrote the date at the top, and wrote down every word of the conversation with my father exactly as it had happened. A family will tell you blood is thicker than water until the day blood asks them to give something up. I thought about that for a long time that night. Then I closed the notebook and went to bed. The documentation phase took 63 days in total. Not because 63 days was the minimum required. Some of what I had accumulated in the green notebook was already substantive, but because I needed to be certain. Because this was my family, and not a case file. Because my father was not a stranger to me. He was a man I had known for 33 years, a man who had held my hand so tightly at my mother's funeral that my fingers went numb, and I had not said a word because I could feel how much he needed to hold on to something. Because I understood professionally and personally that family court interventions move at a pace that is not easily reversed, and I needed to be sure before I set something in motion that I could not stop. I want to tell you honestly what those 63 days felt like, because I think it matters. There was a Tuesday evening in the 3rd week of April, at 11:15 at night, when I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open to the Henley County Family Court self-help petition portal, and a glass of water I had poured and not touched, and the green notebook open in front of me, and I could not make myself type anything. I had been sitting there for 43 minutes. My upstairs neighbor was playing guitar, the same 4 chords cycling over and over, slow and a little loose, the sound traveling through the ceiling the way sounds do in old buildings. I sat with my hands in my lap, and I looked at the screen, and I thought about my father. I thought about his face at my mother's funeral. I thought about the way he had taught me to check the oil in a car the summer I got my license, standing in the driveway on a Saturday morning with the hood propped open, patient and methodical in a way he wasn't always patient. I thought about the fact that he genuinely believed Lily was fine, not as a performance, not as a lie he was telling himself consciously, but as a real belief that he held with complete sincerity. My father had spent so many years confusing control with protection that he truly could not see the difference. He could not see it in me when I was growing up, and he could not see it in Lily now. That was not wickedness. It was a wound he had never examined directly, the kind that travels quietly through families the way water travels through foundations, invisible, patient, and structural. But Lily was 7 years old. She was not old enough to name what was happening around her. She was only old enough to learn the silence of a child who has calculated the cost of taking up too much space. I looked at the glass of water. I looked at the notebook. I straightened the notebook on the table, positioned my hands over the keyboard, and I began to type. I called my colleague and friend Yvonne Tate the next morning at 7:41 a.m. and asked if she could meet me at the coffee cart in the building lobby before the day started. Yvonne had been in family services for 13 years. She was not someone who gave easy comfort or reflexive reassurance, which was exactly why I trusted her. I stood at the coffee cart with my cup in both hands and told her everything: the green notebook, The school records, the weight chart, Ms. Voss's words, the conversation with my father in the kitchen. Yvonne listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You already know what you're going to do. You're just scared of what it's going to cost you." I said yes. That was exactly it. She said, "It will probably cost you something. Do it anyway." She picked up her coffee. She said, "She's 7, Rosalind." And then the lobby filled up around us, and we both went to work. I called the family court duty navigator line 4 days later. The navigator's name was Carol. She was efficient, thorough, and kind in the particular way of someone who has had this conversation many times and has chosen to keep making it feel like the first time. She walked me through the petition for temporary joint legal guardianship, not removal of my father's arrangement, not termination of Derek's parental rights, but a formal legal recognition that I had standing to act in Lily's interest and could access her school records, her medical records, and her counseling referrals. Carol told me to bring 3 categories of documentation: evidence of my relationship to the child, evidence of my professional background and character, and any written record of specific concerns. I had all 3 and more. I asked how long the process would take from filing to initial response. Carol said summons delivery was typically 7 to 10 business days from the filing date. I wrote down the date and time of our call in the green notebook. May 6th, 9:23 a.m. 41 minutes. Over the following 2.5 weeks, I organized everything into a green folder with tabbed sections. The school attendance records, 14 absences in 1 semester, 9 unexcused. The letter from Ms. Patricia Voss, which I had requested formally, and which she had written with measured professional care, describing Lily as a very careful, very quiet child who had expressed worry about making mistakes on a regular basis. The pediatric well-child summary from 18 months prior, the last on record, noting the 6-pound weight deficit and the unreturned follow-up recommendation. My own 63 days of dated, timed observations from the green notebook, transcribed and organized chronologically. A personal statement I wrote in 2 drafts, the second of which I kept. A copy of my license and employment verification from Henley County Child and Family Services. I did not tell my father what I was preparing. I did not tell Derek. The only people who knew were Yvonne and Carol the navigator and my therapist, Dr. Callum Reed, whom I see on Wednesday evenings at 6:15. At our session the week before I filed, he asked me what I was most afraid of. I thought about it for a full minute before I answered. I said I was afraid my father would never forgive me. Dr. Reed said, "And if he doesn't?" I said I would survive it. He said, "You've said that about other things you've survived." I said, "I know." He said, "Then you already have your answer." I drove to the Henley County Family Court building on a Thursday morning. I wore my navy wool coat, the one with the missing 3rd button I had been meaning to replace for 2 years. I had the green folder on the passenger seat and Carol's intake reference number written on a post-it note on the dashboard. I arrived at the building at 8:52 a.m., and I sat in the parking lot in my Honda Civic for 14 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I sat with both hands on the steering wheel, and I breathed, and I thought about Lily drawing a horse in the margin of her placemat. The careful proportions of it. The serious expression. I went inside. The clerk's name was Darnell. He was unhurried, precise, and entirely without ceremony, which I found steadying. He reviewed the documents methodically, asked me 2 clarifying questions about my relationship to the child, and when he was satisfied, he stamped the petition and issued me the filing receipt. I looked at the digital clock on the wall behind his desk. It read 4:47 p.m. I had been in the building for close to 8 hours, between waiting and the filing process itself. I thanked Darnell. He said, "Good luck to you," in the way of someone who means it without inflation. I folded the $47 receipt in half and put it on the passenger seat of my Honda Civic, and I drove home. The process server's confirmation email arrived in my inbox at 2:14 p.m. the following Tuesday. Summons delivered to 14 Carver Mill Road, Dunellen, Ohio. My phone rang at 2:31 p.m. I let it go to voicemail. I sat at my desk at work and I did not reach for the phone, and I looked at the open case file in front of me, and I breathed slowly and evenly until 3 o'clock, when Yvonne appeared in the doorway of my office and said simply, "Today's the day?" I said yes. She nodded once, put a takeout menu on my desk, and said, "Then I'm buying dinner tonight." My father called 7 times before 5 o'clock that Tuesday. My brother called twice. I listened to the first voicemail my father left that evening, standing in my kitchen with my coat still on. His voice was not the measured, accounting ledger voice I had grown up with. It was something rawer and less composed than I had heard from him in years. He said, "Rosalind, I need you to call me back today. I do not know what you think you are doing, but this is a family matter, and family matters do not go to a courthouse. You call me back." There was a pause. Then he said, "This is a betrayal." And he ended the call. I stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then I put the phone on the counter, took off my coat, hung it on the hook by the door, and made dinner. I called Derek the following morning at 8:15. Derek was quiet on the phone in a way I had not heard from him in a long time, not the absent, checked-out quiet of his worst stretches, but a different quality of silence. A listening silence. When I had explained everything, the green notebook, the documentation, the petition, what I was asking the court to establish, he did not raise his voice. He did not accuse me of overstepping or inserting myself where I didn't belong. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, in a voice I recognized from childhood, the voice of the brother who used to help me with long division at the kitchen table before everything in our family calcified into roles, "Is she really not okay, Roz?" I said, "No, Derek. I don't think she is." He was quiet again. Then he said, "Okay." Just that word, flat and serious and real. "Okay." Derek agreed to submit a supporting statement to the court. That was not something I had anticipated, and it changed the shape of the proceedings significantly. The family court mediator assigned to our case was a woman named Sandra Park, composed, thorough, and skilled at sitting in difficult rooms, which I recognized from long practice. Sandra scheduled an initial conference for 3 weeks out. I attended with my green folder and my full documentation. My father attended with a neighbor named Harold Griggs, who had known our family for 30 years and who told Sandra that Gerald Fairhaven was the most responsible, most dedicated grandfather he had ever known in his life. I do not doubt that Harold believed every word he said. Sandra Park listened carefully to everyone present. She asked my father specific questions about the pediatric records gap. She asked about the 14 absences. She asked, with professional neutrality, whether Lily had been seen by her pediatrician in the past 18 months. My father said she had been adjusting. He said the absences were during a difficult patch. He said his daughter was inserting herself into a family situation based on professional bias from her job. Sandra wrote things down in her notebook without looking up. The conference lasted 2 hours and 17 minutes. Sandra Park's recommendation, submitted to the presiding family court judge 3 weeks later, was that a temporary joint legal guardianship arrangement be established between my father and myself, with monthly structured check-ins, updated pediatric records within 60 days, and a referral to a licensed child therapist as a condition of the arrangement's continuation. It was not removal. It was not termination. It was a structural change, a new door in a wall that had previously had no door, and it meant that I now had legal standing to walk through it on Lily's behalf whenever she needed someone to. My father did not speak to me for 41 days after the order was finalized. I counted them not obsessively, but because I noticed each one, the way you notice a gap in a familiar row of things. On the 42nd day, he called on a Sunday morning at 9:17 a.m. I was at my kitchen table with my tea and the newspaper. He said, "I want you to come for dinner next Sunday. Lily asked if you would be there." I said, "What time?" He said, 6. That was the entirety of the conversation. I wrote the time in my appointment book and turned back to the newspaper. The Sunday I came back to Carver Mill Road, Lily was wearing a yellow sweater I had not seen before. It fit her correctly. She sat down at the table without checking my father's face first. At some point in the middle of the meal, she asked, in a voice that was just a voice, not a measured, calibrated, tested voice, just a child's voice, if she could have more of the roasted potatoes. My father passed the dish without a word. I watched this from across the table, and I did not remark on it, and I did not allow my expression to shift, and I ate my dinner, and I talked to Lily about her horses. She had a whole sketchbook of them now, she told me. 22 pages, 22 horses, each one different. She showed me on her phone the photograph she'd taken of her favorite one. It was a bay horse in a field, head turned slightly, painted in colored pencil. She had spent 3 afternoons on it, she said. It was extraordinary. I told her it was extraordinary. She smiled and put her phone away and reached for the bread. That is not a dramatic ending. I know that. There was no confrontation where everything was named and resolved. My father is not a changed man. He is the same man navigating a shifted arrangement, learning slowly and imperfectly what it feels like to share the standing he had kept entirely to himself. He has not repeated the word betrayal to my face since the first voicemail. I do not know what he has said about me in rooms where I am not present. I have made peace with not knowing. Sandra Park's counselor referral connected Lily with a therapist named Dr. Amara Mensah, who works out of a small office on Birch Street in Westonville with a waiting room bookshelf stocked at child height. Lily has been seeing Dr. Mensah for 7 months. She calls me on Friday afternoons sometimes, just to talk about the horses and her friends at school and what she wants to be when she grows up, which changes week to week in the perfectly reasonable way of 8-year-olds who have not yet been told to settle on something. She asks for seconds at dinner. She wears clothes that fit. She takes up the space she is entitled to take up, which is all I wanted for her from the beginning. Not rescue, not drama, not a story she would have to carry. Just room. I have my Wednesday evening appointment with Dr. Callum Reed, which I have kept for 5 years. I have Yvonne, who checks in on me by leaving coffee on my desk on hard weeks. I have the 41-minute drive to Dunellen once a month, which I have stopped dreading. I have the green composition notebook, which I retired when the petition was filed and replaced with a different notebook for a different purpose. Forgiveness is not access. Understanding is not reunion. Compassion is not a key to my front door. I understand my father more clearly now than I did at 12 or 18 or 25, and that understanding coexists in me alongside the knowledge that some things cannot be left entirely to a family's private management. They need a structure. They need a door. Real family does not test whether you can survive without them. Love that demands you shrink is not love. It is management. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors. And you get to decide who walks through. I think sometimes about who Lily will be at 18, at 25, at 33. I think about the fact that she will have vocabulary for her own experience earlier than I did, that she will have had someone in her corner with the legal standing to stand there, that she will not have to spend years in adulthood carefully unlearning the silence of a child who learned too young to make herself small. She may still have things to unlearn. Most of us do. But she will have had a different foundation to start from, and I believe that matters in ways that are slow and invisible and real. Family is whoever shows up when there is nothing to gain. I showed up with a $47 filing fee and a green folder full of dated observations and the 14-minute paralysis of sitting in a parking lot before I could make my feet move. I showed up because a 7-year-old drew careful horses in the margins of her placemat and waited to be told when to eat, and I was the person in the room who could see what that meant and who knew what to do about it. The cost of keeping the peace in a house, where peace means being the smallest person in the room, is your whole life. I paid that cost for a long time. I decided, on a Thursday afternoon in May with a Bic pen borrowed from a court clerk's cup, that Lily would not begin paying it before she was old enough to understand what was being charged. If you have ever sat across a table from a child and seen something in her face that you recognized, a careful stillness, a practiced smallness, a learned invisibility, and told yourself you were probably misreading it, and kept telling yourself that for months, I want to ask you something honest. At what point did you stop being able to convince yourself that what you were seeing wasn't real?